bist du sie aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschehen? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel Schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gab.
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary Holy Land from the heathen. This is Matt Pegas.
And this is Dan Baltic.
And we're here today with none other than Peachy Keenan, who a lot of you will know from Twitter. She writes for American Mind, and she's got a book called Domestic Extremists, A Practical Guide to Winning the Culture War, coming out the Tuesday after this is being recorded. That's Tuesday, June 6th. From Regnery Publishing. Everyone should pick it up. Dan and I checked it out. It's a great book, and we'll be talking about it today. We're recording this the Sunday before the release date of the book. We're going to endeavor to post on Monday or Tuesday so it can coincide nicely with the release of the book. But Peachy, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
Peachy, you also, of course, were an honored guest 2 weeks ago at New Right's first ever live reading event here in Los Angeles, and that event is where I kind of met you for the first time. Although I've been aware of you online for a long while, and I think I've definitely followed you, and maybe we've even been mutual followers for a long while. But that was our first time meeting in person, and thank you again for coming and for agreeing to do the reading and the Q&A after. It definitely added a great flavor to the night. And it was a good chance, obviously, for you to promote your book. But yeah, I guess wanted to acknowledge that, not like a land acknowledgement or anything, but just acknowledge the, I guess the continuity of that, of how that's kind of how. Yeah, I think you've been aware of us, we've been aware of you for a long time, but we finally got down to doing an episode sort of because of that. So I guess, yeah, did you have any? I remember even in person, you were talking about how kind of awesome it was to see such a crowd of, sort of conservative leaning people in Los Angeles. Did you have any other thoughts like that on the event?
Yeah, that was totally wild. I'm sorry you couldn't be there, Dan, but I was just like blown away because I had no idea, like, would anyone come to this? Like, we're in like deep LA, like what? And it was like packed. And then as we're talking, it was me, Delicious Tacos, Curtis Yarvin. Mm-hmm. Like the crowd was just sort of wrapped and like quiet. There was no heckling. I was sort of nervous going in.
Oh, me too, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah. Like Antifa was going to show, like, no, I've never been out. That was my first time sort of out publicly as Peachy anywhere, ever.
Yeah.
And
it looked like a great event, really.
It was magical.
I wish I could have been.
It was magical. It's kind of surreal for me. I mean, it really.
Totally.
I think this is the first time I'm talking about, I guess, on the podcast. Like it was very much the product of just like random sort of like, I reached out to Curtis, not really expecting him to necessarily want to do it, but he was like, let's do it. Reached out to Delicious Tacos. I thought maybe we'd be able to get him, but he was also very much game. And then you came to Isaac Simpson, friend of the pod. Isaac Simpson from the Carousel is the one who kind of reached out to you. But by the time we had three people, it was like, man, this is a real event. Then Lomez got interested, and it gained so much of a life of its own. And it was such a kind of short time frame of just really about 2.5 weeks of really planning it, that by the time it happened and 150 people showed up, it was just kind of this surreal thing. Like, wow, this is real. I was nervous. It felt like it would be worth it, even if there was a little bit of friction or something. But it really went off without a hitch, and I was thrilled about that. So
except for Tacos almost falling off the stage, but he's
I had forgotten about that. Yeah.
And he's sober these days too. So
yeah, it wasn't his fault. The chair was wobbly or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was great. I hope that Isaac throws more with Adrian or wherever. It was so cool. Like afterwards, like young guys were coming up to me, like followers of mine, and like meeting readers in real life, in real time, was just like an amazing experience, as an anon.
Oh yeah.
You sit in your room. Yeah.
It's just such a thrill, like to actually have someone who's just like, oh yeah, I follow you. I listen to you. I'm a fan of your writing. It's like, wow, I'm not, this is a real thing that
Yeah.
exists in the real world. And
Yeah,
that's just like
people,
an amazing feeling.
yeah, asking me to sign my book. I had a few copies there for sale. I sold out all 11 copies. I was like
Hmm.
thrilled, you know.
Yeah. No, I'm not surprised. I think you probably could have sold more if you had more, you know. I mean, these were
It was just
special advanced copies, right?
yeah, it was just so
Yeah.
cool. And it was like, wow, you know, you're writing this stuff, you're throwing it on the internet. Like, who knows? My mother reads it. That's all I know, you know. And to get that real-time feedback is just very, you know, it's very empowering, as they say.
Yeah, no, totally. I agree. And yeah, I do think there's going to be more of such events. I think some conversations are already happening. And I think we'll move on from the event and talk about the book very shortly. But I do think the event was a good kind of proof of concept and a proof of like that we're kind of far away. Not maybe we're not so far. I don't want to get overly confident, but that you can have events like that without Antifa or just without hecklers. That there's kind of a, you know, we're in a slightly different era now, I think, where people
Yeah.
are willing. I mean, I'm sure there's still some people who would love to, you know, sling tomatoes at us or whatever, but like, I just think there's a general openness and a kind of exhaustion from a lot of people with like the worst aspects of the culture war. I do think it'll come back. We'll get into the culture war, and you know, our event was called Acorns for the Culture War. We'll get into all these themes later, but I think we're in a bit of an ebb where people are kind of exploring new ideas, and I think that really was what the event was about for me, is that kind of openness, I guess, because you know, everyone there was like open to like conservative ideas, but I think that there was a wide variety of people there, and it was really cool.
Yeah, it was awesome. And I mean, I think there's just a hunger out there. And like, as you guys know, as writers on the right, you know, people are just so excited to see anything that isn't, you know, the kind of trash that is sold at my local Romans, you know, like
Right, yeah.
just anything that's just normal, that's just cool, that like makes you feel like you're not just like this hated pariah in society. So I think that feeding that hunger is good for people. It's good for the writers, the content creators. And like, I'm just hoping to see a lot more of it. And it's very exciting.
Yeah, no, definitely. It was a breath of fresh air, as they say. And on that note, yeah. So again, just to help, you know, plug this thing, your first book, Domestic Extremist: A Practical Guide to Winning the Culture War, comes out this Tuesday the 6th, from Regnery Publishing. I read it. I think Dan and I both checked it out in advance of this conversation.
Absolutely.
It's you know,
Thank you.
it's a good long book. I think it's 300 pages about, but it goes down like water. It's very, very entertaining. It's obviously polemical. There's kind of political polemics. You have a very clear point of view. The book is sort of a manifesto in a sense, but it's also filled with humor and wit. And obviously, you don't need to hear it from us, but you're a great writer, you know, as is reflected in the book, but also your American Mind essays. These are entertaining. They come from a conservative point of view, but also a very individual, you know, very distinctive voice that you got going. And the book's just a lot of fun. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
sure,
guys.
Of course. And, you know, just to give people a kind of a sense of the tone, it is, and I want to get into like what's in the book. But you know, it is a political manifesto. It is a practical guide to winning the culture war, but it's peppered with things like there's some great listicles in there. You got your own version of the "in this house" sign. I think right at the front of the book, feminist bingo, these kinds of things. So yeah, again, just really, really filled with humor, and a lot of personal anecdotes too, which I probably want to talk about in somewhat more depth later on. But I think it's really cool how it's a book that both kind of presents ideas and sort of philosophical and moral and religious at times reasoning for those ideas, but also it's kind of a bit of a personal memoir too, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's no way that I could have even written this book or, you know, become Peachy, you know, without taking the journey that I took. You know, I wasn't always like this. Like many people, I had like a long trajectory from sort of like basic bitch, you know, liberal, feminist, you know, random, just whatever I was told, whatever. I was like an NPC, like all my friends, you know, and then finally awakening politically and then socially. And then, you know, finally I did convert to Catholicism. But like the real moment that I can pinpoint point to how I kind of developed like this Peachy voice was really with when I got on Twitter. My husband literally showed me how to use Twitter. He was like, I was like, Trump came on the scene and there was all these like funny memes and I didn't know where to find them. I was not on Twitter. And he's like, get off Reddit. Why are you on Reddit? Like, you have to, let me help you make a Twitter account. I was like, what's Twitter? And that was sort of how I sort of developed this voice. But I mean, it's my voice. I mean, I'm not putting on really an act at all. This is me. I just wanted to be anonymous because at the time, I was writing for a very large, enormous entertainment media company. And, I would have been beheaded right in the office if I had dared express any of this stuff. But yeah, the book is filled with like my trajectory and how I got this way. My origin story as a supervillain.
No, it's very cool. And kind of as you point out, without doxing yourself, like you were a writer sort of before this, and it's cool to see how bringing your talent for writing in with a newfound set of beliefs seems to me like a big part of the trajectory.
Yeah, I think that one thing that has been lacking on the right is that, a lot of people who have like, they believe in things that we all agree with, but they're not going through the normal channels of like fiction workshops and, very kind of high elite writing workshops and working for these companies like ad agencies where you're like honing your craft and like figuring out how to write pithy, funny, kind of like insightful magazines or whatever. Like that whole world has been sort of sealed off from conservatives. And I mean, this stuff, it does exist, but not to the like highly refined levels, because they run New York media, they run Hollywood, like they're all the screenwriters, right? So the ones who are like the dissidents, like us and a few guys that I met at the event who are like in entertainment.
Yeah.
You have to have this talent, but most of the talent, and this is the war you guys are fighting, is being put to use to serve, like the mob and writing trash and just pushing their narrative, pushing their ideas, Bechdel tests and, diverse casting and all that crap. And so we on the right, where are our base screenplays? Where's our base TV shows? Where's our base novels? Well, I mean, none of us are going to get into the Iowa Writers Program. Although I do know one base guy.
Not with Nutcracker, that's for sure.
You're done. You're blackballed forever. Dan, so, like for me, I happen to have this like very long experience. Well, not that long, not that old, but like since I graduated college, I was an English major. I wrote for the school like humor magazine, which was sort of like their answer to. You did too, yeah. It was like their answer to the Lampoon, And in like the 90s, this sort of like very ironic, cynical Gen X voice was kind of like the thing, and magazine writing had like a heyday. I was like obsessed with reading magazines, Spy magazine, like all that, loved all that stuff. Vanity Fair, even Harper's and the New Yorker, they were great, and
Esquire. Esquire like back in the day, magazines were, they were fun to read. They had like stuff that you actually like. It was the whole broad nationalist man's world refrain. Like, magazines used to be fun. They used to have stuff that people wanted to read, but now it's so in a way it really creates a great opportunity for people like us, people like Ren, to actually produce stuff that's readable.
And you're seeing so many more of these. Mark Granza with I Am 76 and Lomez's Passage Prize, and there's all these sort of smaller Period Spring, all these sort of smaller publishing houses and little magazines kind of blossoming in this like very online, like right wing sphere. And like, look, I mean, my book kind of was born out of that. For some reason, like Lomez was joking with me like that I'm like this crossover figure from like, the far right frog Twitter to like more normie like MAGA moms.
I wanted to talk about that because I think in a positive sense, I think that's true. And especially recently, like you've gotten a little bit of at least a retweet from Ben Shapiro, right? And you were on Dennis Prager's show, right?
I was on Dennis. I'm going on Dennis again. And like next week, like you said, Matt, my book comes out on Tuesday. So they've got me booked on like all these huge shows.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah.
Like I'm supposed to I'm totally face fagging next week also. Okay.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Nice.
Big,
yeah.
big, yeah.
Well, for example,
that's great though. Yeah.
I mean, I would rather I love toiling in anonymity. That's like much safer. See, I do not long for the spotlight. Like, no. But they were like, listen, wait, do you want to sell books or do you not want to sell books? And I was like, okay, greed works. Greed is good.
Speaking of selling books, I believe that you have like a tremendous pre-order on Domestic Extremist, right?
Oh, what did you hear?
Well, I mean, like I think maybe it was you or someone posted the Amazon ranking, and like Domestic Extremist is already like up there.
Yeah, I do have a lot. I do have a lot of pre-orders. They told me. I mean, it's not like something like thousands of pre-orders, but I was just excited to get like, oh, will I even get 50? And now it's hundreds, and they're like, that's good for rankings, and I don't even know why you need pre-orders, but I've just been like working my butt off trying to get them. It's really tiring. It's really exhausting. But Tuesday night, that was the night that I mentioned this at the event, Matt. Mm-hmm. That was the night I was booked to go on Tucker Carlson's show, like live, my face, like a whole number, go to the studio at Fox. And then his show got canceled right after that. But I was relieved because I had been so like nervous. I was like, oh no, I'm just going to I get stage fright,
Oh, sure. But that still would have been amazing. And it kills me that it's not going to happen.
They still have me booked on Tuesday, but I just not sure who the host is going to be.
Oh my God. Wow. That should be interesting. Either way, I'm sure it'll be great. And I'm sure, go on.
If I sound slurred, that's just because I had to do like a couple of shots before the show.
Yeah, fair enough. I would be nervous about that. I feel like I would be maybe like Tucker is so much like one of our people, but I'm sure they're gonna have a great host who's gonna be sympathetic to the message. But
whatever. I just have no choice.
Yeah. No, a couple things to unpack in that. Like, one, I did want to just sort of highlight for your own status with the book. Tucker, is a fan of yours and does give you a great blurb. And it's really a shame you won't, that he won't be the one on Fox. But like, I imagine whatever he does next, I'm sure, you in dialogue with Tucker is still a thing that will happen. So we'll look forward to that.
Tucker, if you're listening, just call me, babe.
No, I'm sure. He's a regular listener. He never misses a new write.
I would like to think, and we're tunneling toward each other. I would say this sphere of Twitter, and I mean, as you were saying, sort of Peachy, like you're kind of this connection between two. I don't like to call it the far right at all because I think it's not always that extreme. I mean, maybe it's extreme in a domestic extremist sense, but it is frog Twitter. It is something decidedly different, and I do think that you have a hand in both camps, which is really cool. Obviously some people get sketched out by like a Ben Shapiro influence or something, but like I think it's great. I think new ideas coming into audiences who are going to be sympathetic to them is a great thing, and I'm really excited to see this. I have some other thoughts on that. I will also add, so you have I just wanted to, sort of unpack this for people and sort of, to the book's credit, you have the Tucker blurb. You also have Molly Hemingway, Mary Harrington, Alex Kashuta, Christopher Rufo, and a lot of other heavy hitters blurbing it. So I think, kind of from the sort of based like post-feminist thing, lots of love for this book. And then even just, from the slightly more mainstream conservative world, still people fighting the good fight like Rufo. I think I'm not surprised it has a lot of pre-orders because there's a lot of people who are giving it a lot of love and attention. And I think it's going to be a hit. I think it already is.
Well, I mean, from your lips to God's ears, Matt. Okay, like you never know with these things. I mean, I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen. I have, very low expectations because I mean, I was Googling like, how many books like average does like a nonfiction?
It's lower than people think.
It's very low. Like the average book sells like less than fewer than 100 copies. And especially if you're a female, apparently I didn't know this. The nonfiction like world is like very heavily male, which is fine. So. I'm very comfortable. Like I find myself, the women on the right, like we're always outnumbered and we're fine with that. Like, I don't care at all. Like there are a few of us. There's like me, Mary Harrington, a couple, Alex Kashuta. There's like we're all friends, behind the scenes. But it's definitely like a little more male oriented, but that's totally fine. But like, on Tuesday, Jesse Kelly has a book coming out, and like I think Glenn Beck or like some other huge, guys. So we'll see.
I think yours could outsell them. I do.
Let's go.
And not just like a glass ceiling thing. I think I haven't read. I'm not too familiar with even who Jesse Kelly is. I have to confess. I know the name. I obviously know who Glenn Beck is. And I'm not trying to knock either of them. But I think the ideas in yours are really fresh and delivered with a humor that I think the energy is maybe on your side. We will see.
That's awesome. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, but even sort of content wise, I think that you kind of represent a unique sort of bridge between a more tried and true sort of conservative path or voice with the kind of frog Twitter thing. And I think this is for me embodied by a lot of the quotes you put at the headings of your chapters. Like obviously domestic extremists, we'll get more. I want to kind of give a rundown of the structure of the book because it gives people a good idea of what it is. It delivers a pretty a conservative message that a lot of people will be familiar with, but you back it up with quotes from the likes of BAP, Ernst Junger, Camille Paglia, who's not even right wing, but she's a sort of frog Twitter staple. You got some Lana Del Rey lyrics in there. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of elements. Also, you kind of just get into some deeper level topics that would be unfamiliar to a more mainstream conservative audience, like xenoestrogens in the food supply and the environment and seed oils. All these things are little shibboleths that show that you are kind of cued into this world too, but bring it pretty harmoniously in. With that more tried and true conservative message.
I mean, those quotes and like the younger quote and stuff like that, that is just, this is where like the energy is, and this is what like makes Twitter fun for me.
Yeah, definitely.
This is where like the humor is. This is where like, whatever, the edgelord Twitter. It's just like it's great, and I have no problem with it. And I'm like a groupie, of like, the Baptists or whatever. And I think that that whole shift in the right, whatever this like fringe is or whatever, the populist right, I don't know. It's like all the energy is here. Okay, like NormieCon energy. I mean, it's an institution. It's really the only one we have on the right, like the NatCon and CPAC and all these things. Like nothing wrong with them, but they're not going to win hearts and minds. Do you know what I mean? They're a little bit preaching to the choir. And my whole ethos, my whole mission as like even beyond the book. I mean, this is actually, the book is part of my multi-pronged strategy to, save the West. Okay.
Right.
It's really about being attractive to more people, their hearts and minds, not just preaching to the choir. I can write 1 billion Federalist articles. I can write 1 billion American Mind articles. They're going to be read by people who agree with everything I'm saying. Okay. But like, if you can get someone, especially like young, to be attracted to something that's like a scene, right? Like a vibe, a movement with attractive young people, funny, they're hilarious, like these jokes. And if that can be more appealing than some like boring, stodgy, shrill, angry leftist, you know what I mean? That's who the competition is. And so like, how do we package our messages? Because like we have these ideas of like how to live, how not to live, like what you should do with your life. How do we package them in a way that can peel off people who are not yet fully totally sterilized by, the rainbow mob or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's, I think, what you guys are doing. What's so important that you're doing this. I mean, it really is.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, these are the acorns for the culture. Like, Dan, are you writing another book?
I am. Yeah. Okay. I'm writing a sequel to Nutcracker.
You are.
It's in its nascent stages, but it's coming along.
And how you just self-published that, right?
No, that's actually through Terror House Press.
Terror House, that's right. Okay. All right, awesome. And they're doing the second one too?
Well, I'm not sure yet. It's something that when I say nascent, like I'm literally just kind of like writing it right now, and we'll see. I'm open to offers.
Yeah, no.
Not that I don't love Terror House; they're great, wonderful.
Publishing,
but
got it. Yeah, and
also
even
with regard to moving into the mainstream. Like one thing that, I think is important to note with Domestic Extremist, like Regnery, that's a mainstream publisher. And the
conservative but mainstream, definitely.
Yeah, the blurbs you're getting, that is like you are one of the first Anons to, like, as far as I can tell, to like really kind of break out of our Anon Twitter ghetto and kind of reach the mainstream. And that's important to note here. And just, this is in some ways, your book is a bit of a milestone, I feel.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It did occur to me recently that I think I'm the first like anonymous or pseudonymous writer that Regnery has ever published. I mean, they publish, for those who don't know, like Ann Coulter, Molly Hemingway, I think like Mark Levin,
Ted Cruz's book. Yeah.
Which who?
Ted Cruz's book, I think.
Ted Cruz probably. Yeah. I think they just did the new Josh Hawley, although I'm not 100%
it sounds
sure.
Right. Yeah.
They're doing Megan Basham. They did Mary Harrington's American version of her new book, which came out like in March, Feminism Against Progress, which is also great. So they definitely are moving into this more like edgier, people, but no one that's been in Anon. And like one of the things we would talk about, they were like, well, how are you going to promote your book if you won't show your face? Like, can you wear one of those like Mexican wrestling masks? Like, how are we going to get you to sell the book? And I was like, I mean, I don't know. And so finally they just kind of wore me down, which is why next week, I'll be displaying my little self out there.
I think it's fair enough. I think you've hit a big enough audience that I mean that's a very personal decision, but I can see why that it's ready. You're ready to take that step.
Yeah, like you said, I'm not so much afraid that like Antifa is going to come and burn my house down. I'm not that famous yet. I am more worried about the people who know me, but who don't know me as Peachy,
right?
Who are in for like a little bit of a surprise if they happen to watch Fox News, which none of them do because they're libs. So that will be.
You might be surprised at like how little anyone knows or cares. I mean, not that I have personal experience with it.
No one cares.
Think, it's like obviously Tucker had an issue with Antifa, but I mean, he's so mainstream. He's so visible and so much of a culture warrior every night back when he was on Fox that eventually someone takes issue. But a lot of us can. For a long time, I'm not overly optimistic. There's issues. There could be issues down the line, but a lot of us, I think, can kind of fly under the radar a good amount.
Yeah, I think that.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, Dan. Go ahead.
I was going to say I suspect that it will also potentially serve as a bit of a filtering mechanism, where people who see what your ideas are and what you're about, your friends. Well, like the ones who like actually, are real good friends, they won't care. Or if they do care, they'll continue to engage with you.
Yeah.
And people who are just kind of like knee jerk, like, oh, I can't associate with someone who has X, Y, and Z belief. Well, they, probably weren't great friends to begin with.
Yeah. I mean, the good news is that we have basically shed all of our shitlib friends at this point.
Yeah, congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, they kind of, I think it wasn't like explicit, but they kind of got the message when we kept having child after child.
Right.
Was like, I wasn't like other girls. You know what I mean? Something was wrong with me. And so, these are people like on the west side of LA or New York City, and, they'll be shocked, I'm sure, but like, I don't talk to them. I'm not going to miss anything if they decide to like, you're dead to me or whatever. I don't care.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm insulated enough by cool people and friends in real life and online that I feel like a little bit of a cushion there.
Definitely. I mean, you talk about that a little bit of the book, and in some ways it's almost maybe part of the message of the book is like, it's not even always about the beliefs you wear on your sleeve. It's kind of more about, I'm going to ask you to define the very basic question of defining domestic extremism as you define it in a moment. But it's almost like you embrace this, I don't even want to call it a lifestyle because that feels like a sort of a lived word in itself. You embrace this traditional, way of being, having children, etc., maintaining a house, and just naturally people know that means you're conservative. Like, it's not like you need to tell them. And you hear this even from people in a totally apolitical way talk about how once they have kids, they have trouble relating to people who don't. It's this kind of beautiful process of nature that you engage in that takes you with it. And again, it's not always about philosophy and kind of getting convinced of one set of beliefs or another. It's about embracing like a role and a vocation.
Yeah, no, exactly. It is a vocation. And, when you get to a certain number of children, you kind of like transcend like worrying about what people think of you, because you're like, well, I'm like committed now. I am leaned all the way in to parenthood. A lot of the moms I knew, back in the day, living in a little bit of a bluer area, they would have maybe one or two kids, and they were always trying to get out of their mother time. Like, they had to escape all the time, girls' weekends, girls' nights, like, that whole culture of getting away from the kids at all times. Like, and that's exhausting. That's not a good way to live. I don't think anyone should.
You're in
like
rebellion with your own nature on some level.
Yeah, you're being torn in half, and being with the kids is just like, you can't even deal, because at work it's so quiet, it's peaceful, you can get your shit done. So my thing was just finally like, well, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna lean into it. And that's it. And this is number one thing. I mean, I still do all this stuff. I somehow wrote a book. I don't know how.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, you have to just switch your mindset. It makes life so much easier.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, on a very basic level, what is this, modest proposal of domestic extremism as presented by the book? I know we kind of just talked about it, but how would you, in a nutshell?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the title is ironic. The left thinks we're the extremists, but we're actually the ones who just want to live the way people were living within recent memory, like normal people with beliefs that people have been having all through, since the founding of this country, like basic stuff. This is not rocket science. I didn't like uncover brand new ideas. Here they are. They just all have become taboo, all these ideas now.
Yeah.
And so domestic extremist is someone who is going to basically pull themselves out of mainstream culture and all the bad ideas, all the new ideas, all the madness. They're going to reject it totally. And they're going to lean into what I call, domesticity, which is kind of a big word. I don't mean like housework. Okay. I just mean like refocusing yourself towards, who you are, like a long-term relationship that's stable, that's loving, and that you can like raise a family in, and like not just like get married, have kids, but also commit to someone. Like, this is like a book that counsels against things like open marriages or polyamory or like or like being on Tinder for 10 years and having a 3-digit body count, like, staying on birth control for 25 years, having multiple abortions, like all this stuff that's sold as like, this is how you live as a woman. This is all good for you. It's like, well, but like, is it though?
Yeah.
Like maybe that's actually not going to be conducive to your long-term health and well-being, and that's really what the book is about. I'm trying to say these very taboo things, like, don't do that stuff. And like, you're not allowed to say this anymore, which is completely insane that you can't say to a woman, You know, when you have a newborn, you know, the best thing for you and the kid is probably to like be around the kid as much as possible. Like, how dare you? How dare you suggest such a crazy thing? So, you know, being extremely domestic is just like my cute way of saying, like, you know, get rid of all those bad ideas.
Yeah,
no, totally.
I mean, it's easy to do in a sense, because I mean, not easy to do, not like it's easy to reject the, you know, the values of your peers and, you know, your culture. But when you remember that these are the values basically since the dawn of time, which were, you know, kind of like, these are the values that lead to the propagation of the species. So, you know, I mean, like when you place it into context, like, oh, well, maybe the values since like 1965 are not the most, you know, reasonable and healthy values. And that, you know, I think gives, you know, you and others a real sort of like ammunition and, you know, confidence, because you're standing on the bedrock of, you know, what historically has been true. So
yeah, I like to say that, you know, every single person alive today comes from a long line of domestic extremists.
Right.
Like back to prehistoric cavemen. Okay.
Right.
The reason we're here is that we come from the people who are able to figure out how to find a mate, to reproduce, and like keep those babies alive. Okay. And like we all have this history, this like long genetic like lineage, and somehow we've all forgotten. Like all that information, all that kind of like ancestral knowledge has been burned. And there's like this new way now to be. And I'm just like, I want anything to do with it.
And how sad it is to be, you know, potentially a genetic dead end.
That's right.
You have like your DNA, you know, since the beginning of, you know, time, you know, it led to you, you know, your, you know,
completely
parents and, you know, ancestors, on and on. And because, you know, you're focusing on being, you know, a marketer and, you know, your dating apps, whatever, like, you know, oh, well, I mean, I guess, you know, she missed her window and she's not going to have children. That's just really, and I mean, like for men, I mean, okay, there's no real window. I mean, like as Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, that's recently proven. But I mean, nevertheless, you know, many men, you know, and I mean, throughout time, many men, of course, you know, do not have children, are, you know, unsuccessful. But that too is, you know, Lindy in a way, you know, it just men will not across the board be successful at procreating. And women, you know, generally will be because of, you know, various biological reasons, which makes sense. What do you think about that?
I mean, I really like how you kind of emphasize like this is a natural process that you can kind of lean into. I mean, it's, you know, to make your life about this creative act of having a family, and it's kind of insane how much there is that dissuades young people and especially young women away from doing that. But like it's just as you kind of said earlier, it's like a very simple mindset difference of leaning into that. It's not really like a lift yourself up by your bootstraps and do this great thing. It is a little bit of that, and you know, the sort of unfortunate economic realities may involve, like, it's not always going to be easy, but there really is this strong sense like this is the natural way, and you just have to attune yourself to it, and you're going to be happier. And the people around you are going to multiply when they're children, but they're going to be happier, and it's what's best for everybody. And this is where we all came from. I think it's a really beautiful aspect of the book, the way that's spelled out.
Well, thank you, Matt. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, one of the first like sort of germs of this idea from my editor at Regnery was like, you know, we need to get women to make more babies, you know, and like everyone has been thinking about that. Now this idea of like pronatalism has become like a meme. It's become this sort of like kind of like mini trend. People are talking about, how do we stop, you know, Indian Bronson's always talking about this. Elon Musk, how do we prevent total population collapse? Because I think the TFR for the average woman now is way below 2, you know, 2.1 is the replacement rate. And I think now the latest numbers are like 1.6. And that's extremely low. And America used to have the highest in like the developed world. You know, we were we were having way more kids than like the French or the Italians. Yeah. Like they're in a death spiral, and they have been for a long time. But now we're in a death spiral. And it's, you know, and Alex Kashuta has talked about this. And I'm actually going to a natalism conference. Kevin Dolan is having in Austin, or is it? Yeah, in December. With like the Collinses,
you know, but yeah, that's awesome that you're going.
Yeah, this, you know, Simone Collins and Malcolm, that couple that I think Alex just had them on her podcast, and people who are also concerned about this problem. So my approach to it was like, well, okay, you're never going to convince the like blue-haired, you know, marketing chick at the office who's like a furry on the weekends, who lives in like a polyamorous, you know, compound or whatever. Like, you're never going to convince her to be like, have 3 children, you know, you can do it. No. So you know, I mean, we're going to peel off like some of the young women, I hope, but really I'm looking at young families, young couples who have figured out like, okay, I wanted to fall in love with someone. I think I found the right person. I want to have a child, and people feel like they can't have more than 1 or more than 2. Like, there seems to be a real scary line between like 2 and 3 kids. And, you know, my point to these people is like, look, if you can get to 2, a third is like really no big deal. Like, it's really not, you know, and throw them in there, just do it. And they might be an easier sell for this message than the 38-year-old cat lady who has up armored her innards, you know, for years. Like, you're not going to really get her to, oh yeah, I think I'll go and like have twins. Like, she might be definitely a harder sell. But I think, look, these women, I'm worried they're going to be making a huge mistake and wasting, like, yeah, you waste your 20s, you waste your 30s. These are the best years of your youth, right? You're at your prettiest, you're at your most fertile, you're at your most like attractive, right? For normal, natural, biological reasons. Those are real because those are the years that you can attract a man and have a baby or whatever. And women are like squandering these riches. Okay. Mm-hmm. And they're squandering them on, you know, like Caleb from West Elm. Okay. And like who knows who.
Absolutely.
And just, you know, on the dating apps. And I mean, I'm, like I said, I'm Gen X. I was never on a dating app, but we definitely thought our 20s were first for like raging and having fun and going out. And like the whole thing was avoid pregnancy. Don't settle down. Like, you don't even want a boyfriend. Like, we're having going out parties, whatever. I mean, I wasn't like that crazy, but you know, then like we'll do that when we're old, like in our 30s, you know? Yeah. And like to this day, my husband and I regret that we didn't meet when we were a little younger. I mean, I met him in my late 20s, that we could have had a couple more kids if we had started, because once you get into it, it sucks to feel like, oh, I'll never have another one. What if you want one, even, you know, you kind of age out, and you age out quickly. And, so, I mean, I'm hoping that like people have actually said to me, I read an article you wrote on American Mind and I decided to have another baby. That's happened to me.
Yeah, no, that's great. That must make you feel amazing.
It does. I'm like, you better name it after me.
Yeah.
What is my name?
Peachy, yeah.
So right. Yeah, you don't have to do that. No one has to name their baby Peachy. Name your cat Peachy. That's why I wrote the book.
Peachies out there.
I mean, yeah, and part of that for me, like you were saying in the beginning, Matt, like making the book fun, like you're making it entertaining. This is not an academic book. I am not an academic. I'm not a PhD. I mean, I went to a really good college, but like I was a pretty lazy student. Okay. So I'm like not some
I feel
like
that.
Yeah, it's funny. All the people I know who are really great at Twitter, like we all kind of like slacked off as much as possible, like in our academic careers. But I still, you know, look, I graduated magna cum laude. Okay.
Same, actually.
But I feel like if I can make it fun and make it appealing, make it cool, that attracts people more than like some school marm standing over them like, get married. What do you do? You know? And like you guys are making your work that you're doing, it's appealing because it's fun, it's cool. And that just alone attracts people to the message, which they then get like secondarily, you know?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's kind of a little bit of the acorn, or part of the acorns for the culture war idea that Yarvin talks about, and that we named that event after. And I like, yeah, with your message is very much, it's sort of entertainingly hyperbolic domestic extremism, but at the same time, it's also, I think, very simple. You kind of keep it simple and accessible. What you're saying, you have a lot of people in sort of capital T traditionalist, more academic type of circles, I guess online and traditionally, wherever, where it's all about we have to go way back, to the roots of, the scourge of modernity and take it up by its roots. But your idea presents something much more simple, which is like even the mores of like the 80s and 90s were preferable to now. And there's kind of like this right-wing critique of that idea where it's like, oh, if we only go back 10, 20 years, we're just gonna end up back where we are now. But I think there's I don't look at it that way. I look at much more like a basic sort of small t traditionalism can be a door to something much greater and more perennial. And I kind of feel that a lot in your work, because you are very Gen X, which is another thing. Maybe we'll talk about a little more, and that I like about your writing is that it's so much from that Gen X perspective. You even, in your anecdote about meeting your husband, you tie it into Sex and the City in a really entertaining way, because you did meet in Manhattan. Maybe we'll talk about that more. But, it's that very much that, like, even because I guess, yeah, we can even talk about Sex and the City a little bit more now. Like, even a show that's as quote unquote degenerate as that, and that does kind of show that, party hard in your 20s thing you were talking about, even that by today's standards has these little tidbits of something slightly more traditional, like the fact that Carrie Bradshaw is always trying to marry Mr. Big. Right. She doesn't really talk about kids pretty much ever, but and she's like radically pro-abortion and all this stuff. But at the same time, there is that orientation towards some kind of settling down with something a little more traditional. And your book is obviously a lot more noble than Sex and the City, but like at the same time it sort of brings even a more Gen X take on what that would look like. And ultimately I don't think your book is like that. Ultimately your book is very traditional and very conservative, but at the same time it kind of has it's a simple proposal, like just look at the way your parents were or were not, but look at what a normal family looked like even in the 70s or 80s, and like that's better than we have today. Does that resonate with kind of what you were setting out to do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, speaking of Gen X, it is interesting. I realized after that, me, Curtis, and Tacos are all Gen X.
Oh, very
much. I think is very interesting. I'm not sure why that is. There's a lot of like younger, millennial writers who are also good, but it was just funny to be up there. I'm like, oh, these three old fogies.
No, I don't. I don't think of Gen X as old fogies. I think Gen X is kind of cool right now with a lot of like Zoomers. They kind of see. And Bret Easton Ellis, cool. Yeah, the 90s are cool. Bret Easton Ellis, who's kind of conservative. He's not conservative, but I'm sure you're familiar.
He's like based-ish.
Yeah, he's based-ish, and he talks about this, how there's a lot of sort of dissident Gen Xers, because they had in his context, he's not talking about family. He comes from a very different vantage point as a gay man and as a writer, but he talks about but I think there is something related. He talks about how Gen X was a generation that, compared to millennials and Zoomers, got a taste of that sort of freedom of the way culture was earlier on, and that obviously that freedom was specifically not conservative a lot of the time, but there's still something vital about it that's missing from a lot of millennial culture today. And in an ideal world, you have that lovely freedom, and then you craft it into something like a family or something like domestic extremism. There is that path of life thing that's animated by that vitality. It's kind of a little more esoteric, but I think there's something to that, and there's something to that sort of a lot of Gen X people, frankly, conservative and non-conservative alike, I think kind of miss that greater vitality and freedom, and reject a lot of the sort of woke stuff and a lot of the other restrictive COVID austerity crap of the past few years.
Yeah, I think for some reason the Gen X is like better able to resist, because we're just more cynical. And so like if things look like stupid, we're gonna like think those are stupid. We're not, for some reason, that like gene, that like radar detecting, is not as strong in younger generations. I'm not really sure why. But also part of it comes from the fact that a lot of us survived boomer divorces.
Yeah.
And I mean, I certainly did. And I remember way before I met my husband, when I was still in my Sex and the City, fun phase, thinking like, well, if I ever do settle down, like I am never going to subject my children to what I and my siblings had to go through.
Yeah.
Which was like a divorce, and it wasn't like a horrible divorce. It was amicable, but it still tore our lives apart. It still blew up everything, to this day, it still affects all of us. It affects our kids, and I just vowed like, okay, I'm going to use my parents' mistakes as like a what not to do.
Yeah.
Okay. In many ways. And that worked. Now, one of my siblings did end up getting divorced, but it wasn't him doing the divorcing. Like he definitely did try to avoid, the mistakes that our parents made. And in terms of Sex and the City, that was a touchstone show. I mean, Alex Kashuta has talked about it. It was sort of like, girls, but like you said, Matt, they're still looking for like the traditional, like big romance, Mr. Big, the like dream, the Prince Charming, a Cinderella story. But before you meet him, here's like 15 other guys you'll, hook up with.
Yeah.
And we thought it was just very glamorous and, move to New York and the streets are paved with Manolo Blahniks, you're just the streets are paved with guys and it's going to be so fun. And, those characters, I don't watch the new show. I can't
either. Yeah.
Can't bear to look at it. But also the thing is though, that you didn't notice at the time that these women were leading lifestyles that were a little bit kind of gross. Like they're being kind of like, a little slutty. You didn't notice it because it was super fun. It was funny. It was kind of glamorous. Like my mother was like encouraging me to move to New York because we loved the show, right? Like she did put it together. Like, do I really want her like being Samantha, like, or no, Miranda, like me, or Samantha? No, probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Samantha was the wild one.
It's like the show was still, even though bad stuff happens in it, it was still oriented towards something that's by today's standards wholesome. Sort
totally,
of. Maybe that's giving it too much credit. I don't know if it was really oriented towards something that was wholesome, but there still was a sense like you're doing this dating because you want to meet someone, which right. I don't want to discredit my fellow millennials too much. I think obviously a lot of people want to meet someone, but there's a little more, so more modern shows, which I also would maintain are wildly entertaining while displaying this kind of thing, like Girls, the Lena Dunham show from 10 years ago, and then 5-10 years ago, and now Euphoria. It kind of tracks like a degradation. Again, I actually like both of those shows, maybe as a guilty pleasure, but like, so I'm not even knocking the shows. I just think you can kind of track the degradation of. You talk about this a lot, like, the war on normal people. I think that's an Andrew Yang turn of phrase. You don't call it the war on normal people, but, re-normalizing normal, this kind of thing. Sex and the City kind of still existed in that normal universe. Right. Whereas Girls, I think very poignantly, Girls, the Lena Dunham show, kind of started to show the fading frontier of that kind of normalcy. And then Euphoria sort of shows the complete, flouting of it, but it's all one could write cultural studies through the lens of these shows. Absolutely.
I liked Girls. I thought it was well written. I think Lena was a really great writer. It was very, very clever. I didn't enjoy her level of nudity. Okay.
Sure.
Like, it's clearly she has like, she's like a super narcissist. Okay. Like needing to show herself nude in every which way, incredibly unflattering scenes that like I would never, you could put a gun to my head and I'd be like, just shoot me, because I'm never going to do anything like that. Euphoria, I admit I don't watch, but I've seen like clips of it.
Much.
I read a lot about it. And I find it to be, I mean, look, I'm sorry, it's a form of child pornography. And especially for those young actors, like they're acting, but still here's like young people who are being put in these situations where I just feel like, I mean, I would never want to be Jacob Elordi's mother. You know what I mean? Like the cute guy on it. It just looks like it's quote realistic, like the drug use and stuff. And like, well, it's glamorized.
I actually don't. Yeah, I don't. I do think it glamorizes it, and I don't think it's realistic. I know I just said that I liked it and have watched it, so I not even. But like, but that being said, it's definitely like kind of stylized. Like it's, it's entertaining because it's so vile, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
Which maybe that says something about me that I do watch it, but I guess we don't need to split hairs over that. But I don't disagree. Maybe it's a weird show to even put in the same conversation as Girls and Sex and the City, because it is a very different beast.
Well, I think it shows a real, progression, as you say, of degradation, in the sense that, so like we remember Sex and the City, Samantha obviously was like, like in some sense like a cool character, and her sleeping around was like valorized in a certain sense. But I think ultimately the show, like, it does condemn her in some sense, because all the other characters are kind of like, oh, Samantha's at it again, and they're like essentially kind of like all trying in some way to find a guy. And like, obviously like Carrie is trying to find Big, and and has a thing for him. And so like you take that through line to Euphoria, and like, it's not, I mean, okay, and they are, as you say, they're younger, so the they're not in marriage mindset, perhaps. But yeah, I mean, there's less, I think, of a moral emphasis on, obviously on traditional values. And that's like something that I think, in some weird way was visible in Sex and the City.
Yeah.
And here we are now. I mean, if you look at, there would never be a show now or a movie that's sort of like valorizing a young couple, like falling in love, and that being a good thing with no problems associated with it. It's always going to be
Absolutely.
bad. Of course, Romeo and Juliet, that didn't turn out so well. But like, if you look at Frozen, like, I don't know if you guys have young girls, but I had to watch Frozen and Frozen 2 like many, many times. Okay. And they're really, they're terrible. Frozen 2 is a horrible movie.
I never saw the second one. Yeah.
I could really not sit through it. But in the end, Elsa, the Ice Prince, the Queen, the beautiful, she ends up she's like an incel, or she's like asexual, or maybe she's a lesbian. We're not sure.
Yeah.
And then Anna, her sister, who's sort of like the kind of narrator of the whole thing, she, has this like dopey guy, the big dopey white guy, and he like doesn't know how to ask her to marry him. He's a complete like kind of loser. She wears the pants. And it was like, it's just, I mean, it's like feminism 101 for little girls, like, you tell him, when you want to get married.
No,
like,
no, I find that stuff so destructive.
They've subverted the whole like Cinderella, the fairy tale traditional notion of romance. Now the new one, I mean, I don't know if we have to go on a Disney tangent here, but like, I don't even want to see the new one.
I didn't even know there was the Little Mermaid. Yeah.
Oh yes.
No, it's so much propaganda. I mean, in a very perverse way. I think that's one of the reasons people do like shows like Euphoria. I think the message of that show is bad, but when so much of entertainment is like this moralism, but it's not our moralism, it's a very different kind of moralism. I think people do like just how dangerous something like Euphoria feels. Of course, there's an alternative to both of them, which is a better sort of moral message that we'll see post vibe shift, as they call it. Like, maybe there will be better movies and entertainment, and there is good stuff coming out now, but not on that mainstream level yet. And we'll see where things go. I want to get back to the book in a moment, but because I do think it's always interesting to ask sort of somewhat unexpected questions. of people. And I feel like it's kind of interesting to get your take on this pop cultural stuff, since it's not always what you're writing about. And no worries if you know nothing comes to mind. But